It's a big deal having it on that semi-trailer, and tonight at 3 o'clock, sort of following it down the mountain.
How long will the trip take you?
Oh, I honestly don't know. Depends what's round the corner.
It is nice to see that journey finally taking its initial step. But I do believe that there is a little way to go yet.
I'm not going to fit the way that I think the permit sent me. I don't think it's worth it.
When Basil asked me to do some doodling, he said, "The only advice I'm going to give you is I want this sculpture to celebrate us as a nation."
I think Terrance could have done it. I mean, it's just not everybody who can do something like that. It just was fantastic.
Well, Basil Sellers is a very modest person. What he's trying to do is to give to Australia something in recognition of what Australia has given to him and to every other migrant who has come here.
Well, it's the most exciting project I've ever undertaken.
I honestly believe it'll become as iconic as the Sydney Opera House.
Sculptures are for the people.
This was a statement about what migration has achieved in this country.
Public art has a long history in Australia and dates back to the mid-19th century, but the interesting thing is it's always been a lightning rod for controversy.
If a work of art can bring you to a point where you're unaware of yourself, that's powerful.
A modern-day patron, Basil Sellers, and an artist, Terrance Plowright, come together in Sydney, Australia, to create a significant sculptural piece which Basil will offer to the people of his nation. However, the rollercoaster ride as they attempt to navigate a complex political maze threatens the very existence of the project.
Hi, George. Thanks for meeting us. I've got something interesting I'd like to talk to you about.
It's a pleasure. I've been trying to work it out, Basil.
It'll be a bit of a surprise for you, I can tell you. I'm now commissioning a major sculpture, which Terrance is going to be doing. And I'd like to just tell you how it came about and why I want to do it. I'm going to be turning 80 in 2015. And as I get towards that milestone, I was thinking about my career and my background and how lucky I was that my parents decided that they were going to migrate to Australia. They could easily have gone to England because I was born in India, and migrating to this country has been a huge success from my point of view, and the country's done a lot for me.
The partitioning of India in 1947 was the catalyst for Basil's parents, Alf and Irene Sellers, to leave their homeland.
People like our family, who are Anglo-Indians, partly English, partly Indian, felt that there would be no future for them in the India of the future, which would look after Indians first, as you'd expect.
At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom.
Keen to make a new start in a country that was not in disarray or conflict, the Sellers would choose between the UK and Australia.
However, we had one small problem, that we were brown. We weren't completely white. You might not think that's a problem, but it certainly was in 1948, because at that stage Australia had a white Australia policy, and you had to be white, otherwise you couldn't migrate to the country.
Do you believe that the so-called white Australia policy will always be a stumbling block?
No, I don't think at all that they should allow coloured races into Australia.
Keep them out. Keep all the niggers out. Japs and everybody else. Well, we don't want them.
I don't want to see reproduced in Australia the kind of problem they have in South Africa, or in America, or increasingly in Great Britain.
It's only because Mum, when she was in her 20s, unfortunately for her, she contracted a condition called vitiligo. And vitiligo is a condition where you lose the pigmentation in your skin. She rocked up to the Australian High Commissioner in Bombay, which is across the road from where the English one was at the time. And there was these long queues of Anglo-Indians wanting to get visas to go to the mother country of England, but there was no one inside the Australian embassy, so she went and said, look, I want to actually migrate to Australia. And they said, we better see the High Commissioner. So she went in to see the High Commissioner, and he looked her up and down and said, oh, you're white. You can come to Australia, that's fine.
In January 1948, Irene, accompanied by her sons, Basil and Rex, bid farewell to Alf, who remains in India for a further 2 years, working in the railway colony of Balsa.
So when we arrived, Mum had boarded us into King's College, but she had to go somewhere. Eventually she managed to get a house not far from the school, inside the roof, inside the rafters. That's all we could get. So we lived underneath the galvanised iron roof for about nearly 2 years.
George, the simple underlying concept of the work is really a celebration of the Australian nation. But it's a celebration of 60,000 years. Not just the last 230 years. It celebrates the first footprints that set a foot on the continent 60,000 years ago under the Southern Cross. And it also celebrates the Europeans coming into the nation 230 years ago, but now celebrates a nation that's over 200 cultures, 200 nations.
At the end of the meeting, and I said, look, George, you know, no disrespect, but you are a politician. What do you think of the sketch?
I'm confident that when I show the Premier, and I'm going to do so immediately, he too will be inspired by the concept of the sculpture, the magnitude of it, the idea of the benefaction of it, and I'm sure he'll realise that I'm really enlisting him and other ministers effectively into coming together to try and achieve what this vision represents.
It's a great first step, and I hope that the Premier does like it and we can proceed. Barry was very supportive.
In fact, he said, I'm so enthusiastic about it, we'll see if we can have this accepted within the next few days.
Basil is pleased with the enthusiasm and backing of the Arts Minister. And based on a handshake agreement with the Premier of New South Wales, he gives Terrance the green light to commence the multi-million-dollar project, which he will underwrite without any financial burden on the taxpayer.
So what size are we talking about?
We're talking roughly 50 feet high, so 15 metres. It's large.
It's very large.
Symbolic of Australia's Indigenous and migrant heritage, Basil's gift is earmarked to be installed on the foreshore of Sydney Harbour and will be a prominent addition to public art in the city.
We went ahead and started building it.
This is the main structural ring that everything will be tied to.
I was exposed to Terrance Plowright through the Sydney Cricket Ground sculptures. Indeed, that's how I met Basil Sellers as well.
Well, the inspiration for this project came from a phone call I got from Dennis Lilly, asking me to go down to Melbourne. He said he's going to have a sculpture of himself being unveiled at the Melbourne Cricket Ground. And his was in fact the 10th sculpture of the 10 that are around this Melbourne Cricket Ground today. So I went down there, and when the unveiling took place, I looked up and there's Dennis with the demonic eyes and his hair all over the place and just staring down at me. I thought, wow, that's fantastic. That's a sculpture. I'd like to be able to do some more of those. That's how this whole thing came.
So I didn't want to be seen as a bit of a nutter going overboard with my emotion, but nonetheless that's what I was feeling, because when I hung up the phone I just went, yeah.
We'd become good friends as a result, and I really enjoyed his work. I used to travel up there to see the progress of the sculptures, and that was always a great occasion.
I was excited because I had a great love of cricket, and I was also excited because I had an enormous respect for Richie Benaud, and for me to be chosen to do that I just felt it was an enormous honour.
He's a genius. He just thinks differently. I've had a number of conversations with him about certain projects, and after about 10 minutes he sort of left me in his wake. People like him, they're very few and far between. Their mind is different to ours, so it's, you've just got to trust their vision and what they're trying to achieve, and you know that at the end of the day that whatever they produce is going to be outstanding, and it's not going to be something that's been done before. It's going to be unique and a one-off, and he does incredible work.
As with many families who migrated to Australia, Basil and his brother Rex were able to overcome adversity by embracing Australian culture.
First weekend I was in Australia, I should say, I actually was picked for the first 11. At the age of 12 is still a record. That was the real beginning of the love affair of cricket, because instead of being a little brown boy who spoke differently and acted differently and had no culture with the Australian culture, I suddenly became a hero. So I was becoming much more outgoing than I could possibly have been if I'd been bullied by the racists in the community. And I've been forever grateful for that, because I know that that's helped my personality and my character to be able to go on and do things other than cricket. But if it wasn't for cricket, I wouldn't be like that, and I suspect I wouldn't be here today.
The brothers achieved great success. Rex, an exceptional leg spin bowler, would succeed Richie Benaud in the Australian cricket team. Basil embarked on a stellar business career, tackling a diverse range of ventures, culminating in the takeover and rebuilding of some of Australia's iconic brands.
We have one more Waratah boomerang to complete, and this afternoon we're actually going to start rolling them, so it's quite exciting.
When I look at Terrance's fine and handsome visage, I see wisdom, I see character, and I see compassion.
I think we realised that Terrance wasn't using art as an art's sake, he was using it as a tool.
When we think of Terrance's achievements, it's easy for us to think of this wonderful house that he and Shirley had built. It's easy for us to think of his art.
In his whole exploration of philosophy, he was very interested in philosophy. And I think he was using art as a tool of expressing that. Rather than wanting to become an artist.
We think of how Terrance has changed as Australia has changed. We think about how his works are being used to beautify Sydney in preparation for the Olympic Games and for the new millennium.
The Sydney Harbour Foreshore Authority has been informed about the project. A plan will be determined to introduce this to the MCA and to some of the other authorities. Everyone seems to be enthusiastic about the work. We can't ask any more than that at this stage.
Within the history of public sculpture, there was always an assumption, dating back to, I guess, classical Rome or to the Renaissance, that a figure on a plinth in public would be inspirational, that the person worthy of a public sculpture was a person worthy of our admiration, a role model, the embodiment of civic virtue.
Many of the figures that I've created, to be honest, have been ordinary folk who probably haven't brought about a paradigm shift in the way that we think and feel. Many of them have been lauded by our community because they have been great achievers, a number of them certainly in the sports arena. But what I find interesting is that they've all been good people. They've been people that the community have looked up to after their sporting careers have finished. These people have gone on to continually serve the community.
The foundation is important to me. I think it keeps you grounded. It gives you a sense of reality, and that you don't get too carried away with what you've achieved and what you've done on the sporting field. It does put it in perspective, particularly my charity, which deals with kids with rare disease and rare illnesses, and you see the difference that the charity can make. And with people like Basil supporting me, and corporates and individuals, they all can make a huge difference.
It is sporting history that is being woken again today. But our social, intellectual, political, scientific and artistic history deserves similar reawakening.
What I'm trying to capture in space is a real strength.
I believe that the artistry of Terrance Plowright is so special because he can portray and identify the humanity of the subject, whether it's our great cricketers such as Richie Benno, and of course we are seeing this now in the wonderful sculpture of Lachlan Macquarie.
Emerged as a singular force, and social media campaigns were so effective that many public sculptures have been the target of activism.
The first major public sculpture in Australia, Charles Sumner's Burke and Wills sculpture for Melbourne, was controversial. Some people claimed that it was too romanticised, others that it was too realistic. Burke and Wills are in it, but what about the other guys who also died on the voyage? And right down to a resident in Collins Street writing to the newspaper and claiming that every time he opened his window of a morning, he saw Robert O'Hara Burke's rear end. So it's always been a really important part of the urban landscape in Australia, but always controversial.
One of the most talked about kicks in the AFLW has been immortalised in a bronze statue. Taylor Harris became the target of toxic online attacks after a photo of her in full flight was published earlier this year. It triggered a wider debate about misogyny and sexism in sport and on social media.
When I posted the photo initially on my private account, I put the caption as "This is me at work," and I don't deserve, nor anyone deserves, to be sexualised in their workplace.
The figurative work for me is a joy to do, and it's a joy to do because I'm working with lots of other people. I'm working with great names that are highly esteemed within our community, and it's a great privilege to do that kind of work.
Terrance is an incredible artist, obviously, and brings things to life that you probably didn't think possible.
think that's really, really beautiful. We are going to have to bring these down. The actual form itself is really, really beautiful. Yeah, I'm happy with that.
When I met him, he hadn't started on art really. He'd just started making stained glass windows. And that was his very first attempt into the art world, was stained glass windows. And I think when I met him, he was on his third window.
From there, the stained glass actually started to snowball into the building of a studio, many more commissions coming in, some very prestigious, and slowly but surely I began to achieve a little bit of a profile in this area.
Actually, we both had studios at the time and we were both developing our studios. I was developing my music studio and Terrance was developing his art studio. But I'd help him in his studio. I hadn't made stained glass before, so it was a learning curve for me. But it was good for me because it gave me an insight into that world.
I think Terrance gets so passionate about things, whether it's about a new commission, whether it's about science, whether it's about nature. He gets so caught up with something passionately.
This book I probably read quite some time ago, and I'd have to say that to some extent he probably did have some influence on me and my questioning of Western culture, Western thinking. I saw him as a very moral human being and a human being with great courage.
Let's err on the side of caution and just see, we'll put it in.
At the heart of the sculpture, the woven basket pays respect to the sustainable and cultural practices that allowed the indigenous peoples to live in harmony with the land.
The basket is also a structural element, so you can see these heavy 80mm sections, 80 by 20mm, that are holding up the basket all the way through. And what we're going to eventually do is run a ribbon in concentric circles all the way down, so it will look like a woven basket. The sail is going to come down through the centre of the basket and it'll be tied into the back of that ribbon at the top. And so that's when this becomes a structural element in itself.
I mean, certainly in my experience, if you give people a point of entry to even the most abstract and complex contemporary art, they'll engage. You know, I mean, the Statue of Liberty. Do people actually really understand what that sculpture was about? No, they don't. It was a gift to the United States of America from France on the anniversary of the American Revolution from another revolutionary nation. You know, it was a very complex, what would you say, geopolitical symbolism, but now it's Lady Liberty.
I have a great desire to relate to human beings on that level that connects us, above and beyond culture, above and beyond religion, and above and beyond politics. And that particular attitude, that drives my life, it drives my work. And with this particular sculpture, it's driving the symbolism throughout this sculpture. And that to me is fundamentally important.
As you can probably see, we don't like these things. So a more polite person would probably just start veering in another direction.
You know, we were always a very active and supportive family right from the beginning.
You should just come around and take one of those.
Yeah, that's a good idea. It's not in focus.
It should go in focus. There you go, go for it.
My father, I guess, and I had some difficulties. He had some great difficulties, I guess, from the war. You know, the residue, post-traumatic stress and all those sorts of things were something that the whole family and my mother especially had to deal with.
You know, at the age of 50, one of the great experiences of my life, and it's something that I think about every day, and that is that I still have my mum and dad with me.
I never ever dreamed that I'd live long enough to see Terrance have his 50th birthday.
I kept on asking my father about the war, and as a child, and he would not talk about it. And at the age of 21, he just came up to me and said, "Son,
this is it. He said, we're going up for a beer and going to tell you a story. I heard stories that are really almost so horrific, they're impossible to talk about.
When Dad was a teenager, what would you have expected he would have been like?
He got lost, didn't know what to do, until eventually he found his way, and this is what he does now, and he doesn't realise. He's found it.
2 years ago, I was commissioned to create 6 works. These were works of my own choosing. They're the direction that I would like to sort of explore over the next 10 years, exploring fields of science, fields of philosophy, fields of nature. I would have 100 designs that I feel would lend themselves to being in public places, in parks. And I'm like any other artist. I'm sure there are lots of young artists around the country who are doing exactly the same thing, who are constantly drawing and designing and coming up with interesting possibilities, but there's no funding there for them. I guess if I have a great ambition, it is to create sculptural works that can bring about within the viewer a same feeling that arises when you're listening to truly great music.
My concern for the environment led to Writing, which was born from my own mind as a hymn to the extraordinary beauty, exuberance, and awe-inspiring power of nature. It is a tribute to the mightily transcendent mystery of being.
Like, who is your inspiration, like your role model?
The greatest inspiration in my life, apart from nature, apart from the universe itself, which is absolutely, infinitely beautiful and profound, and that is the great inspiration in my life. If I'm looking at the human family, the great inspiration of my life would be Ludwig von Beethoven.
It's just it's really powerful. It's like he's lecturing you. The inspiration behind this work is the fact that he saved my life. And I don't mean that he saved my life and death, but certainly it wasn't until I listened to this man's music at the age of 12 or 13 that I felt this immense change in myself.
In the arts, a philanthropist has been assumed to be a patron or a donor or a gifter, someone who endows art or art activity in some way. In the old-fashioned sense, you know, someone who signs the cheques, someone who pays the artist, someone whose name appears above the entrance to a museum.
So I retired when I was 57. Only charitable work I was doing was to just draw cheques every year to worthy causes. I never really thought about the underlying work that was being done and what they were really trying to achieve. I found I had 52 charities and I was giving to each one of these charities. So when Christmas came, I normally sent my charitable money out, of 1,000 here, 5,000 there, 10,000 there. I didn't send it. Which are the ones that are going to come back to me and say, what happened to my cheque this year? Why aren't you giving money to this year? So there's 52 charities. Do you know how many, in fact, did that? 1.
Within Australian art history, one of the great philanthropic relationships was probably the many relationships that John and Sunday Reid had with Melbourne artists in the mid-20th century based at their home Heidi in suburban Melbourne. They took artists in, Sid Nolan, Arthur Boyd, Albert Tucker, Joy Hester. They took them in. Sometimes they gave them somewhere to live. Sometimes they fed them. Sometimes they gave them a monthly allowance. They bought their works. In the case of Sidney Nolan, that is a philanthropic relationship that was deeply personal, financial, creative, and over a 40-year period, and ended up as a gift to the nation. More recently, I think philanthropists are more interesting. They're more active and engaged. They do more than pay the bills or endow the museum. They make things happen.
So now I have 12 charities, all of which I really know a lot about and which I get a lot more satisfaction for than just simply drawing a cheque at the end of the day.
He's a great Australian. I think he likes the fact that not many people know about him. He's very humble, low-key, does his work behind the scenes. He loves to see the results of his work, but he doesn't like to be up front and central with it.
And he's always looking to help people. Every time I talk to him, he's got a new idea, a new way. He's always thinking about everyone else but himself. The guys that have come through the scholarship, it was all about helping the country guys come over, like Phil Hughes and Josh Hazelwood. And then it sort of went further into people like myself that had educational needs. Stephen Smith was living away from home. No one gets to professional status without a lot of help. And I think without people like Basil, people like myself really struggle to get where we are.
I support cricket in many, many ways, and it's not just a matter of supporting it as charity or anything, it's just that I just owe cricket a great debt.
Terrance and the crew are on track as the final touches are made to the basket. A meeting is scheduled to select the location for the installation of the sculpture, and the crew commence attaching the Waratah boomerangs in preparation for the main structural element, the central sail.
My first encounter with Basil Sellers was a note on my desk at the Ian Potter Museum of Art, where I was then the director, saying, please call this number. And I'd never heard of Basil and called him, and over the phone he said, I want to run the biggest art prize in the world.
In collaboration with the Ian Potter Museum in Melbourne, the Basil Sellers Art Prize commenced in 2008. A first prize of $100,000 was offered every 2 years, and the objective of the prize was to encourage artists to embrace sport in all its forms, while reflecting on Australian and sporting culture.
The idea was brilliant and timely, and I believed in it 100%.
Sport and art are both about creative expression. They're about people being at their best. That doesn't mean that they're geniuses or they're excellent. It does mean that they give of their best, they test their ability, their body and their mind, usually both, are at full stretch. That unless you're at full stretch, that there's pain in some way, the mental anguish of whether what you've written is good enough, what you've painted is good enough, or whether the kick you're about to take, the stroke you're about to play, is it going to be good enough? They're all part of the human condition.
I can only say what I saw doing the prize. The artists just liked being around him. And it wasn't just because he was paying for the drinks, you know. They were intrigued by him and they connected with his interest in their work. So, yeah, he certainly showed how to have a sleeves up, you know, relationship with artists.
He's a great man because not only did he do it for me, he did it for hundreds. He's done it for hundreds of people. He's always thinking about everyone else but himself, which is, I guess, for me, what makes Basil Sellers a great man.
He's the sort of guy that's pretty easy to call a friend because he's such a generous soul. I mean, and that's how I know him, because he's been generous to me and my foundation. And he's just a generous sort of person.
Basil Sellers is our patron, our mentor, our guide, and I would say our best friend, because he was so convinced about our commitment towards his cause that he not only opened his purse to us but also his heart. With constant support from Mr. Basil Sellers, through the years, we have been able to shift the women from an informal sector to a formal sector, from a very low-paying job to a good-paying job. We have churned out through the years nurses, computer programmers, drivers, and very, very independent, self-sufficient young women who can take care of themselves
and their families and make a change.
Thank you, Mr. Basil Sellers.
So this sculpture, if you turn around and have a look at the design, where do you think it should go in Sydney?
Near the seaside?
Yes, it's going near the seaside.
Garden somewhere.
Yes, garden's good.
The botanical garden.
Hey, that's good. Yes, you got it.
The Premier has seen the design. He would like to see it installed in Sydney Cove as a celebration of 60,000 years of nationhood.
He had a magnificent idea that on an Australia Day, the podium would be set, you know this, the podium would be set, and this massive helicopter, which he would import from Russia, would overhead lower it into position. The Australia Day ceremony on Sydney Cove could continue. It would have been something.
However, we had one small problem.
The handshake agreement between Basil and Barry O'Farrell is history. Basil, Terrance, and the future of the sculpture are in limbo.
Basil and I were having a number of meetings, and we were worried.
When a problem with Barry came about at this McCauliffe Grange, that there'd be a smooth transition over to the next government and the decision-making there.
Basically, at that stage, we were dealing with the bureaucracy.
And it sort of all changed at that point.
We had no idea whether the baton would be taken up by the new Premier.
But really, nothing much has happened. Lots of inaction.
We had an opportunity to meet the Premier. We took the sketches along, and he, too, was enthusiastic. This was Mike Baird.
We do what we say we're going to do.
For one reason or another, it didn't happen.
The sculpture remains homeless.
I think one of the big risks with public sculpture is that it's never a solo act. There's always going to be the artist and a whole posse of what we now call stakeholders, which is going to be local government, state government, art critics, the benefactors who are paying for it, the people who have to live with it.
The other thing that struck me about all this is that when you entered into this project to give the gift to New South Wales, you did it on a handshake.
Yes.
Is the day of the handshake word is one's bond? Is that over?
Well, I don't think so.
It has shown in his business career, and it shouldn't surprise anyone, that this project is a project that Basil Sellers would never give up on.
I'm not going to give up. I just don't give up.
I think he had a rare ability of identifying opportunities where he saw value.
Philanthropists are risk takers. At their best, they're leaders.
He was in a business that was not particularly what would you call front line. He was in the sort of dirtier end of it, buying companies and turning them around and selling them off. And that was his great skill in the funnel analysis, finding sources of what companies to buy that he thought were undervalued, or the brand not as relevant as it is today, and changing the dynamics of that enterprise. And moving through that process with a degree of empathy. This is a man that no formal education, self-made, learnt by experience, and he had a different strategy about him, and he was firm about what he wanted to do, and he had great belief, and he was passionate about what he was doing. He didn't come with all the baggage that other turnaround agents normally come with. He was the best of the best in that area, in my opinion.
One thing that really struck me, he's very generous in all his charities, but he's so level-headed. And the first time we had a conversation about his idea for a major sculpture down on Circular Quay, we were at his house in Double Bay, and he said, well, let's go down there and have a look. And we walked out the front door, and we kept walking, and we walked up to the main street and got to the bus stop and waited for a bus to come, and then we got on the bus and rode into Circular Quay. So he was not the sort of guy who would, say it's got to be chauffeurs and premium the whole way. He just did it the simple way.
Faced with a dramatic change in political leadership, hopes for a January 2015 installation in Sydney are fading quickly. A determined Basil sets his mind to finding alternative locations, which Terrance will inspect as a possible home for Basil's gift.
There are three possible sites that have emerged. One which is just here to my left, and there's a big space here, which has viewable access from coming up the harbour, and that's quite nice. And also when you're coming from the Harbour Bridge, people coming toward Manly will be able to see the sculpture, given the size of it.
I was getting very frustrated, not only for myself actually, I really was frustrated for Terrance. Now this is the guy that spent years in actually making something spectacular that's going to be well appreciated if it's in the right place, and we were getting nowhere, sitting up over there waiting for a government decision which never came.
The Premier was really keen to have it situated in Sydney Cove. Well, given he has gone and the Arts Minister have gone, we're not sure where we're going now.
Public agencies will look a gift horse in the mouth if they're offered a major public artwork, because they're going to say, I don't care how much it costs and how it's all going to be free. Well, it's not, because it's going to cost me $50,000 a year to own the damn thing forever. You know, and that's $50,000 I could be spending another way.
There were a few articles in the Sydney newspaper saying sculpture without a place. I mean, I basically put my life on hold for 18 months while we were just waiting for a decision to be made.
Well, Basil Sellers is a very modest person. What he's trying to do is to give to Australia something in recognition of what Australia has given to him and to every other migrant who has come here.
He wanted a sculpture that was about arrival, about people coming to Australia, but not about colonisation and invasion.
When you consider the history of our country, from a period of 60,000 years ago when the first footprints covered much of this continent, then the arrival of different explorers over that period of time to the settlement by British, that unification was significant. It became disjointed for a period of time.
Today we honour the Indigenous peoples of this land, the oldest continuing cultures in human history. We apologise, especially for the removal of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families, their communities, and their country. For the pain, suffering, and hurt of these stolen generations, their descendants, and for their families left behind, we say sorry.
We've now moved strongly back to a nation that is many people sharing the same soils, similar aspirations, but their levels of attainment and achievement vary based on choices they make.
A future where all Australians, whatever their origins, are truly equal partners, with equal opportunities, and with an equal stake in shaping the next chapter in the history of this great country, Australia.
He wanted it to be an optimistic sense of different cultures meeting and, I guess, learning to respect each other.
If we can capture the spirit and presence that exists here in the central heart of Australia, if we can capture that and somehow that is incorporated within the sculpture itself, if there's something in the aesthetic of the sculpture that is powerful and evokes that sense of the spirit here in the central heart of the country, then I'd be enormously pleased.
I love the symbolism of the footprint of time, and the boomerangs reflect that. It shows we're deeply connected to a continent that had been occupied for 60,000 years. I see the density of the populations as they are now, and certainly that's reflected in there. So we've grown to many people across this nation. I see the sparseness of the land in the way in which that's represented in the gaps, but that is the beauty of it.
It's time to hoist the sail, which represents migration to Australia by many peoples from many nations.
Basil phoned me last night and talked about the sculpture being placed on a plinth that would be at least 4 or 5 metres high, and that within the plinth we would have some narrative about the 60,000 years of nationhood. Some of the areas that we looked at on Shark Island certainly are great fallback positions, but I think this is outstanding. I think the sculpture would look absolutely stunning here.
Public space is so contested now. Who owns it? Who has rights to it? Who's it for? Who does it benefit? That any sculpture that appears to have an agenda or to be a very direct intervention in that space looks like a risk. I'm not saying that city councils want ambient sculpture, sculpture that just blends in, with the urban fabric and is barely noticeable, but they don't like the idea of people planting a flag, because as soon as you plant a flag, someone's going to build a bonfire around it. If everyone was given due commemoration, we'd be tripping over public sculptures. But conversely, as many people say, why do we need another statue of Cook? It's too far in the other direction.
When we look back over history and we see some of those figures who were just brutal murderers, then I don't have an issue with those figures and the statues that represent those figures being removed from public life.
I don't support removing of statues relating to slavery. So my view is that the next thing we should take down is racism.
Well, we wouldn't have things to point to that could stand the test of time. We would be reinventing everything. We would not be taking due cognizance of the history of this nation, the past, the role that immigration has played, and the special influences that Australia has brought to bear on the migration wave, and the result that we have this wonderful country, Australia.
Ours is an immigrant nation. Ours is a successful nation. A nation to which people came seeking opportunity. A nation where through hard work and commitment, opportunity was seized and realised. For the benefit of those individuals, for the benefit of our nation. All of that is true. It's easily said. Too easy to say without appreciating the effort, the hardship, the sacrifices that make up that history.
To be involved in this particular project, to me, was an enormously rewarding opportunity, because it wasn't just having an opportunity to do the sculpture, to work with figures and clay, and which I love doing, it's great. I really enjoy it. I get enormous pleasure out of it. But it's the subject matter too, for me in this particular instance, was also immensely rewarding. They're all here. The Signorelli family.
9 people?
9, yep. I'm deeply moved and proud that we Australians have an opportunity to provide safe haven. These folk who've been so tormented by the insanity of violence desperately want to participate in a reasonably sane society, and so they come to this nation for safe refuge. But not only for safe refuge, they also come to contribute, to belong, to help build, and to encourage the qualities necessary for our freedom to continue, and where, for the first time, they can genuinely feel safe.
We are a united nation, I think a very united nation and a very harmonious one. Maybe not perfect, but no nation is perfect anyway. Just that we are very lucky to have been able to integrate various nationalities. I think it's about 200 odd different nationalities that are represented in our country. We all live harmoniously here, and I think it's a credit to everybody that's helped to achieve that.
Well, there are two interpretations. Those who have migration somewhere in their background, and I do. I'm the son of a migrant. I married a migrant. So I look at it perhaps more so through those lens than a tourist or an Australian who maybe have been in Australia maybe the 5th or 6th or 10th generation.
50 years ago, when I was much younger, the Australia I saw then experienced has shifted significantly to where we walk and talk and spend time with others from many cultural groups. And I look at the young Aboriginal people coming through now, the young ones I talk to, their aspirations are no different to any other person within our country.
Even though superficially we may appear to be united, I think deep down there are still these divisions and acrimony that I'd like to see corrected. The Dalai Lama, as you know, has been quoted as saying, it's not love that makes the world go round. In fact, love is actually the reason why there's so much conflict in the world. Muslims love Islam, Christians love Christianity. So it's not more love that we need, it's actually kindness to each other. Move on, forget conflict, be kind and compassionate to each other, and accepting of each other's cultures.
In the final stage of construction, two symbolic components need to be welded in position. The first, a large wave that intersects the sail, will be positioned by crane. The sculpture will then be placed on its side so that the last component, a huge ellipse symbolizing the transit of Venus and Aboriginal Dreamtime, can be installed. This is a significant step for the project.
We have the ellipse and we have a sphere representing heavenly bodies, and we have the 880 dots which represent Dreamtime. So we have the connection between Western science and between Indigenous thinking, their view of the stars, their view and spirituality that is represented within this intersection between the two.
The other thing that I see also is the flames that symbolise the burning of and the healing that occurs when you scorch the land, but what grows from it to a future of strength. And the height of those flames show that there is a strong warmth in this country.
Well, this is the phenomenal 15-metre tall sculpture by award-winning artist Terrance Plowright, gifted to New South Wales by philanthropist Basil Sellers, warmly accepted by the former Premier Barry O'Farrell. However, it is still sitting here in the Blue Mountains waiting for the Baird government to commit to a suitable location.
No one likes to be brought to the table the day before the unveiling. In my experience, the best way to address that is you've got to get all the stakeholders around the table right at the start when it's a blank sheet of paper and an unwritten check, and get buy-in early.
Over the next few months, we had 6 councils that actually approached us, and a couple of them actually went down to the minister, who was Rob Stokes at the time, to make representations because they wanted the sculpture.
That's not going to happen. This is too good for just going out to the country somewhere. It's got to be in a prominent place so that the message that I'm trying to give out there, just say thank you to Australia, thank you for doing so much for all of us migrants that have come through, and for all the people, the Aborigines in the early days, that we all live under the Southern Cross, and let's stick together and go for it, sort of thing.
It's easy to forget, but a philanthropist endorses an artist. You know, they say, you're worth it. I believe you. Let's do that. Which is very different from a collector who just says, oh, I like that one, how much?
For a human being to stand silently without commitment to a particular idea and listen to the life around him or her, listen to the nature around him or her, listen to what's coming from inside, and then bring that forth into some form of creation is, for me, the great joy in the arts, the great joy of working in this particular field.
There's no question that a public sculpture can directly impact on a city's economy, tourism, branding.
Well, the arts is an important part of our life.
Anish Kapoor's Cloudgate sculpture in Millennium Park in Chicago, that's a park that gets hundreds of thousands of visitors a year, and that is one of the primary attractions. And you could very easily crunch the numbers and say, even though that sculpture was a multi-million-dollar proposition, it is literally bringing millions of dollars a year into Chicago's coffers.
It's been 2 years since the resignation of Barry O'Farrell. Basil continues to work tirelessly to reach agreement with government officials on a location for the sculpture.
Governments that ignore the arts ignore it at their peril.
In a surprising decision, the Premier of New South Wales, Mike Baird, has suddenly quit.
Basically, at that stage, we were dealing with the bureaucracy. We did have a meeting with one of the cabinet ministers, and I think at that stage that was our 6th or 7th cabinet minister, and we'd been through 3 premiers. And I was having many a conversation with some of the directors of the departments around the Sydney foreshore, and they were all saying, oh, we have a place for it, you know, it's all been selected, it's down at Cockle Bay, and Basil and I went down and we had a look, and it was all done and dusted.
Despite Basil's every effort to negotiate a location for the sculpture, he finds that dealing with bureaucracy is relentless and in vain.
I'd never ever do this again when it has any connection with the government. It takes too long.
Will Basil's gift become a public sculpture of distinction, or will the entire project be scrapped?
That's absolutely wonderful. We really look forward to the meeting. Out of the blue, we have Nick Mitsovic from the Art Gallery of South Australia, who saw the piece and was so enthusiastic about it, he flew up here to Sydney and then begged Basil would he consider it going to Adelaide.
Adelaide wanted it, and Adelaide worked hard and quickly, and it was in a period of 3 or 4 months from the time they first contacted me to the time that we exchanged letters with the gift to the Adelaide people. It was done. And the enthusiasm and the speed at which they worked was fantastic.
And every letter that I get, every email,
After a promising start to their relationship with the Gallery of South Australia, it is déjà vu for Basil and Terrance, who are once again faced with obstacles and inaction.
we had such enthusiasm from the gallery, from the state government and from the council. It was to go on to Pinky Park, and then they together came up with this site on the water, and we've been now working for 2 years to place it on the River Torrens.
I returned from overseas. We weren't making any progress. Nothing was happening. Things were at a standstill.
It's been sitting on its face probably for the last 2 years, ready for transportation to South Australia. We have come across a problem. The engineer that was employed to do all the calculations on the sculpture has lost all the drawings, all the calculations.
Despite a rigorous assessment of the structural strength of the sculpture and the subsequent approval for installation in Sydney, the installation in Adelaide cannot proceed without formal engineering approval. Under instruction from the Gallery of South Australia, engineers have arrived to inspect the sculpture.
I'm really disappointed, and right now I have no idea where this is going to go.
For this sculpture, which is obviously a major piece of work, we've been looking at its kind of structural strength because it's got a lot of very slender elements. The other elements that we're looking at are the beautiful fronds around the base, where we're looking at the potential for people to climb on them in their current site.
One of the conversations that constantly occurred throughout the whole project was the engineering versus the aesthetic. And I found if there was any tension in the project, at times I found that difficult. Because engineers tend to be very conservative, and I would have to put the foot down at times saying, look, that's absolutely out of the question. You'll actually ruin the aesthetic if we move down this path. We must find another solution.
Running your structural add-on here worries me aesthetically.
Yeah.
We had to completely reassess aspects of the sculpture that could be damaged by the public.
But they're difficult things after all. We're going on to public property. It's going to stay on the public property for hundreds of years. So they're likely to get it done properly.
There were some recommendations made to structurally reinforce the fronds.
Given that orientation, if those fronds overhang some of that infrastructure, that's just where we might have to tweak it a little bit.
Unfortunately, the cost of doing that reconstruction was huge. In fact, I think it was heading toward $250,000.
Relative to that, they could go ahead without me. I'm not paying any more than $1 million. Well, we could have done a number of things to get it down to Adelaide and getting it up, but all those things were proving to be extremely difficult and extremely expensive and simply very, very time-consuming as well.
Of all the artworks that I've been involved in over the past 30-odd years, this obviously has been the most worrisome.
Looking at a problem, particularly an intractable problem, you've got to look at something outside the norm. And the real problem is the fronds.
And he said, I think we just should cut them off.
They don't make any difference to the structure if they weren't there.
I must admit, I was in a state of disbelief.
Everybody tells me that's the problem, but getting it down to Adelaide, getting it put up in Adelaide, it's the fronds.
You just can't cut the fronds off.
The many stresses and strains of the project push the relationship between Terrance and Basil to breaking point.
And so I said to him, look, Basil, I think it's wise we just sleep on this and let's see how we feel in the morning.
What's the definition of madness? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result?
Anyway, the next morning I got a phone call from Basil saying, no, I've slept on it. We've got to cut the fronds off. And I said, look, Basil, I'm not in agreement with this.
He's going to scream and shout like any artist and say, take his little baby and cutting it in bits and pieces of it is not going to be real easy.
Given it's my design and I've actually built the work, I suspect if it had been designed and built by a number of other artists around the country, that they would have actually put their foot down.
He showed me an image without the fronds because I needed that just to see what it would look like.
I did contemplate stepping aside, and I had some conversations and sent some emails off to Basil saying that I would be fully supportive of the work, but
If I did step aside, I would help someone else come in to finish the project.
He didn't want them off because it's his first sculpture. He said, that's the sculpture. Well, that's why I went to the Adelaide Art Gallery, who now actually own the sculpture, so I could convince them to take it off.
So this is one of 12 fronds, and as you can see, the huge amount of work. I mean, really, there's months and months of work in creating these 12 fronds.
Well, every patron like myself will always have problems with the artists that they are commissioning work from. It's a given. It's been like from the Medici's time to now. But I never had any problems with Terrance in terms of the sculpture itself, except I was talking about taking off certain bits and pieces, but the sculpture itself that he did, I didn't want to have input into that because it's really an artist's job to do that.
I wouldn't have walked away, mainly for one reason, and that's my loyalty to Basil.
That's the most important thing. We still are friends, and I'll always remain friends. But we still have to speak our minds, and we both speak our minds pretty well.
I received an email on late Friday afternoon saying that there had been some discussion at the Art Gallery of South Australia in regard to Basil's request, and it had now been completely signed off.
They're beautifully constructed, and then they're all compound curves. Nonetheless,
we want to finish it.
Just get it done.
Yeah. I've had to accept that given everyone's involvement and given all the funds that we have available, that this is definitely the best case scenario. There's no other alternative at the moment.
They've got to go, and we're about to start. Do you want me to hold that off?
His pragmatism, after seeing the budget double, has stepped in and he said, I'm shutting the gate on any further expenditure.
He's not as commercial as I am. Then my job is always to think it through and say, oh, no, we're not going to do that.
That pragmatic business decision that he's made, I don't understand all the ins and outs behind that. It seemed that we'd gone so far and so much money had been expended that to spend that extra percentage of the overall budget, I would have proceeded. But in his wisdom, he saw not to, and really just need to leave it there.
The flames that symbolise the burning of and the healing that occurs when you scorch the land, but what grows from it to a future of strength. And the height of those flames show that there is a strong warmth in this country.
I think that the overall project now is a simpler one, and one of which we can be very proud, and I think it's going to be much easier to transport the thousands of kilometres it has to go to Adelaide. And looking at it now and talking to Terrance and seeing how he's gone about it, I have to say it's been terrific, and couldn't be more pleased about the result.
We're stepping across the finish line and bang, it's hit us again, another frustration. They are moving it back to Pinkie Park. So we've lost all of that time, that money, the enthusiasm for the Torrens River, and it's now, I guess we're treading water, waiting for the council to take the next step. And I was gobsmacked when that decision was made, to be honest.
I was able to get direct access to Stephen Marshall, the Premier of South Australia, via a friend, and he had a look at the sculpture's images that we sent over. He was very happy and liked them a lot and invited me to go to Adelaide, have dinner with him, which I did. He drove me back to my hotel after dinner, and we passed something which I had never heard of before, which he called Lot 14. Lot 14 is now the major flagship program of the government, and the Premier felt that this particular sculpture would actually be an excellent addition there.
Basil and Terrance are delighted that Premier Steve Marshall has found a home for the sculpture. With its essential elements that celebrate Australia's past, the successful integration of many migrant cultures, and its science and pioneering spirit, fit well with the aims and activities of Lot 14. When installed, the sculpture will be a prominent feature of the precinct.
I would say that we're 3 to 4 months away from installation.
Right, we just need a final width of it for these permits now. So we'll do that today. It'll be no worries.
Great to meet you.
Same here. Well, the main obstacle with this project here is the width. Yeah, because see, sometimes if you're over 5.3 metres high, you've got to have ergon energy with lifting up power-wise for you. And that just ends up putting another week on the job.
See what the progress is with the GA and so on. What's likely to be the timing. But my overall timing is what I just told you. It'll be between March and June.
Okay.
If it goes to more than that, we'll have a problem.
Yeah.
It's shifted its location, even if their relationship got to the point where great things could happen. You know, the world shifted under their feet at the same time.
From what I can see, I can't see the virus as being anything that's going to stop this from actually going down and putting it up, unless the government, they decide they don't want it.
September was actually set as the date.
We have arrived at a place where we're actually loading it onto a truck. That's significant. And it's significant because it's taken, I think we started negotiating with South Australia 3 years ago. So it's taken 3 years to get to this point.
What is it?
It's a sculpture.
Of?
It's going in front of the space agency, so there's a lot of symbolism.
Oh, the Australian Space.
Yeah, a lot of symbolism in it.
New rocket ship, mate.
Yeah, well, it might be the only way we get it there. For the first time it would have to be 2 years. I said to my wife last night, I actually feel quite excited about the cranes coming in.
It's over 5 years now since I started here. I started with the first ring on the bottom, so sort of hung around to see it go and like to see it go.
And amidst all the issues that we have with the gallery going backward and forward, not knowing what's going on, in fact, because they've had to shut down and all staff have been ordered home for the next 6 days. So we're in no man's land. We have no one to communicate with. And we're right in the midst of this. You can see the cranes that are here. We're talking about big money. If all of a sudden we're stopped midway, that's significant and may end up being a significant cost for the project. Another one.
Hello, hello.
Hello, Terrance. How are you feeling?
You excited about this?
I'm quite excited. It's about to go on a long journey to Adelaide and finally be installed, and I'm very thankful that it is at this stage. It's a huge road train. Apart from Jody and the sculpture, you have pilot front and back, and there are police front and back as well. So an entourage of 6 vehicles. The last 7 years, given the ups and downs of this project, it has helped me galvanise some sense of what it is that I need to do with the rest of my life.
This has been a monumental project in so many ways, but I believe we have achieved what we set out to do. I applaud the team that has done it. Their dedication and their determination has been marvellous because they have had many setbacks and obstacles along the way.
And so, Basil's gift heads for Adelaide. where his life under the Southern Cross started more than 70 years ago.
I really look forward to the sculpture being erected in Adelaide, where it will be seen for many generations to come.
Yeah, I would like to have been done by my 80th birthday, but it never to be. I thought at one stage it might have been my 90th birthday, but.
I'm very proud of what we have achieved. The sculpture is amazing. I'm really happy that it's going to be placed in Adelaide because that's my hometown. I came here with my family back in 1948, in February 48, looking for a better life. And we certainly found it in this lovely city of Adelaide and this amazing country, Australia.